it's not too late to register for the annual International Conference on ADHD. Join us virtually or in person in Dallas, Texas. Listeners of ADHD Rewired can get 15% off their registration by going to ADHDrewired.com/ADHDCon 2022. Everything needs to be lowercase. I'm not sure why, but that is the link to get 15% off, or use the promo code ADHD Rewired ADHDCon 2022 at checkout. I hope to see you there. ADHD Rewired, episode 453. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Marie Ung. Marie is the founder of Llama Life, which I'm going to let her kind of tell all about that. Her background is she's worked in advertising. She taught herself to code by watching YouTube videos and then bootstrapped this company, Llama Life, as a solo founder. And we're just going to get right into it because I think that the stuff that Marie is going to chat with us about today is stuff that we can all relate to, whether or not you are in tech or have any interest in coding, because what we're going to talk about is finding what works for you. Marie, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Eric. So
you are, I'm actually talking to you in the future, right? Because you're in Australia.
That's right.
All
it's
right.
My morning time, and I think it's your evening.
4:30 here, 8:30 the next day there.
Yep.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about kind of what's your ADHD journey?
Yeah. So my ADHD journey began when I was a child, but I only figured it out much later in life. And I think this is kind of a common pattern that I see nowadays, is that people have this discovery later. And for me, it was in my 30s, my early 30s, when I figured this out. It was because I was working in a corporate environment, like you mentioned earlier, in the advertising space. I did that for around 10 years. And I don't regret any of that. It was a really, really good experience. But I kind of just got to a point in my career where my learning flattened out. I'm sort of one of those people. I love learning new things, and I get a lot of energy from learning new things. And, you know, when you're first coming into a job, there's a lot to learn, right? The job itself, the environment that you're in, how to work with different people, how to manage politics within your workplace. So all of that was like a big challenge for me. And I did thrive on that up until a certain point. So I'd kind of climbed the corporate ladder over those 10 years. And I just kind of got to this point where, you know, I was suddenly sitting at my desk and just finding like I just couldn't do anything. I was just really stuck. Even the simple things like we had to do timesheets for our jobs. So we worked. Yeah. So it was an agency kind of model. So I had a lot of clients and had to record the time that I was spending on each client. And every week we were supposed to submit timesheets. Theoretically, it's very simple. You just need to put down the hours that you work on a particular job or client. And I just couldn't do it. And the feedback from my boss was that, you know, you're great at everything else, but you've got to get these little things under control, because you keep coming up on my list of employees that haven't submitted their timesheets from, you know, many months ago, and they're kind of due that week. That kept coming up. And I also got feedback like, how come you're getting out of your seat all the time? it was an open plan office. So my boss sat opposite me. So I suppose she was very affected, right? She could see me getting up all the time. And I was like, I don't know. I just, I kind of have to. I feel like I have to. And
did you feel like you were under
everyone.
a microscope like the whole time, like sitting right across from your boss?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. I generally like open plan offices. I kind of like having the noise around me. As long as one person doesn't kind of stand out above the crowd, like above the noise, if it's just general noise, I'm really good. But yeah, because she was opposite me, I think she kind of bore the brunt of it. She could just see me getting up all the time, making a cup of coffee, going to the bathroom. Yeah, so that was kind of a bit of a trigger point for me. And I actually had a colleague who was sitting behind me. I was chatting to him one day about my struggles, and he goes, "Oh, I think you may have ADHD." And because he said that, I could actually talk to someone about it, and he told me about his journey. So I was very lucky there because, I think for a lot of people, just the process of discovery is quite challenging. Like you might go on the internet, you might read articles about ADHD, and I certainly did that as well. And, as I'm reading stuff, I'm kind of nodding my head going, oh my gosh, this is me. But I also had a friend that was sitting right next to me at work, and I asked him a bunch of questions, and he actually told me, here's the process that he went through in terms of going to speak to a psychiatrist and getting diagnosed and what that was like, and his journey with medication. So he kind of shared all of that with me. And, everybody's path is different, right? So for me, medication doesn't work very well. I tried a lot of different types and I just felt awful on it. So I just kind of self-medicate a bit with coffee, but it's not quite the same, but I think it's better than the alternative for me, which is I got very grumpy and very emotionless when I was taking meds. So,
can I ask you how much experimentation you did with the dosages with hopefully under a doctor's supervision? Hopefully.
Yeah. This was all under supervision. It's not something you want to just try by yourself, but I tried 2 different types of meds, and within those 2 different types, I tried many different dosages. I halved the dosage, I quartered the dosage because I'm quite small as a person. I'm very small in size. So I thought, well, maybe, speaking with the doctor, maybe we just go a bit less and a bit less. And yeah, even with a smaller dose, I think I'm just very sensitive to it. So decided it wasn't for me. And the turning point for that was so I used to live in New York City. I'm in Melbourne now, but I used to live in New York. And, in New York, I didn't have a car. So I kind of just got everywhere by taxi or by train. And I remember one day I was in a taxi. I was coming back from the airport, from JFK Airport. We're on the highway and we're stuck in traffic. It was about 6 p.m. It was like peak traffic time. And I just remember coming back and getting really, really frustrated. The taxi driver missed his turn, right? He missed the turn to get off the highway. And I just lost it. Like I started yelling at him, which is really not my personality. As I was yelling, it almost felt a bit out of body. Like you can kind of see yourself doing this and you're like, what am I doing? But I can't help it. For me, that was the medication. And I went back to the psychiatrist the next day and said, look, this happened. It's really out of character for me. And I just feel like my emotions are just on the surface. And on one hand, I felt emotionless, but on the other, my emotions were at the surface. It was a very contradictory kind of feeling. And yeah, we kind of switched things up a bit after that. And then shortly after that, I was like, no, I can't do this with the meds. I'm just going to try and manage on my own.
Were you on short-acting meds or extended release medication?
I tried all types. Yeah, I tried the instant release. I tried the longer release, the little sort of the granules that you get. Tried all different types, and yeah, it just doesn't quite work for me.
Because I know there's so many different medications now for ADHD, and because when you find the right one, I think it is just can be just life-changing. That even though it's frustrating I've already tried a couple, for anyone listening, I would just encourage to possibly keep trying different meds with a doctor. I know it's a frustrating process because I feel it's as far as when we look at evidence-based treatment for ADHD, we're looking at a multimodal treatment. So it's medication, it's, skill training, it's environmental modification, it's exercise, it's, all those kind of, the lifestyle, the healthy lifestyle kind of things as well. But I think the medication, when it works and you have a good response to it, is such a big piece of that pie that I really encourage people to like try a couple more just to see, because if you can find something that works well, man, it can just make life so much easier.
Yeah, I definitely had that moment, when I first got on it, that, oh my gosh, this is just kind of sorting everything out. But I like what you just said then about it's not just one thing. There's a lot of different things that you can do and kind of approach it from a lot of different angles. And one of the things that you mentioned was just your environment, kind of changing up the environment. And that certainly helped for me. So, I mentioned I'm in this corporate job in advertising, and I got to this point where nothing was really gelling with me with the role. So I actually quit that job, and it's kind of led me to where I am today, which is working for myself. So I have my own startup.
Did you ever think you would work for yourself, like leading up to years leading up to that?
I've kind of always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial streak, but I just, I never really considered it just because of my upbringing. My upbringing was fairly traditional, and it was kind of expected that you go to university, and then after that you get a job, and then you buy a house, and then you start a family, et cetera, et cetera. So from that perspective, no, I didn't really think that was a path for me. But I just got to the point where I couldn't work in somebody else's environment because there were so many different rules and things I had to follow that I found challenging. You had to show up for your job at a particular time, and you're expected to stay there the whole day. You're expected to sit in your seat. Yeah. So obviously when you work for yourself, you can start at whatever time that you want. And sometimes I work really late just because I'm on a roll and things are happening, and I'm like, oh, well, I better keep going because I don't know how long this is going to last, this kind of focus. But the work still gets done. It also put a little bit of, well, I say little, actually a lot of pressure on myself, because that's my income, right? That's my livelihood. So a lot of people say, when you want to start your own business, how long do you stay in your current job? Do you kind of try and do two things at the same time? Do you kind of work on your own business until you're, 50% of the way of the income that you were getting previously? Like, where do you draw the line? And for me, maybe it's helpful to give some context on my living situation, because I'm a single person, so I don't have any family or kids to support other than my dog. So I could take that risk. I had a bit of savings from the corporate job, and I could take that risk. And I just said, look, I'm just going to quit, because that lets me focus on one thing at a time, which is building my new business. And I look at it as a positive pressure that, wow, like you took this leap, you really need to get things going, because otherwise you're kind of screwed. So I was like, okay, yes, I'm going to do it that way and just do a clean break. And it has helped me immensely, because I'm kind of working to my own rules now. I also found something that I'm really interested in, because I made a career change. This was around my early 30s, so later in life. And, I think a lot of people are hesitant, and rightly so, about making that career change. But I think if I didn't do it, I would have gone crazy. So now what I do is software development. So I have my own startup. You mentioned it earlier. It's called Llama Life. It's actually a productivity tool, because I wanted to work on something every day that would benefit me and would help other people as well. But something that an area that I know a lot, an area that I struggle a lot in. So it's not that I'm a productivity whiz, it's that I actually have challenges staying focused. So trying to solve my own problem. And Llama Life essentially it's kind of like a to-do list, but there are a lot of to-do list tools that help you add things to your list, but Llama Life actually helps you work through that list. So it's all about helping manage your attention and actually working through some tasks, not just creating a list.
How so? How does it help you work through the list?
It's very fun to use. So, for example, when you complete a task and you hit complete, it gives you like confetti, right? So it tries to celebrate these little moments, even if it's a small task, right? You get confetti, this sort of animation that comes up to kind of trigger some dopamine, because, we're kind of lacking in that dopamine. So anything I can do from a design perspective to make it fun to interact with and to celebrate those moments, I'll put into the app. The other way it helps you focus is using countdown timers. So I am extremely time blind, right? I have timers and clocks everywhere. So what Llama Life lets you do is it lets you set a countdown timer. So not a stopwatch, but a countdown timer for every single task. And you can make this whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a 25-minute timer. There's a lot of apps that let you set 25-minute timers. You can set a 1-minute timer. You can set a 5-minute timer. And that works better for me because if someone says, hey, you need to focus for 25 minutes, I'll be like, oh, I don't know. It's a long time. But look, if you want to set 25 minutes or you want to set longer, you can do that too. The point is that it's very customizable to whatever works for you. So you've got the countdown timer, you've got a task to focus on, you set the time to whatever you want, and you try and focus while the timer is running. And when you finish the task, you get a celebratory kind of moment.
I was looking at your the website, and it looks like one of the features that I don't know why it's not a standard thing on all countdown timers. Why does it stop at 0 like most timers? It looks like yours will keep going, so you know how much more time you're continuing to work after your timer is up.
That was actually a feature request. So our customers, a lot of our customers have ADHD, not all of them, but there's a good portion that do. And the only reason I know that, so I don't ask people that, I think it's something that's very private. And if you want to share it, you share it. If you don't, that's fine as well. But I know this because they actually email me. I get so many emails and people are very, very open and generous in terms of sharing their story, which blew me away because I've actually done a few startups before Llama Life and I never got that response with those businesses. And where was I going with that? So yeah, so yeah, a lot of customers do have ADHD, and yes, so customers requested this feature. So when the timer hits 0, it'll say 0, you'll get an alarm and it'll flash at you, but it'll also start counting overtime. And overtime, it's not as big a clock, right? Because you don't want to create stress either. It's a very fine balance between creating some pressure to do a task and creating too much pressure that it becomes stressful. So for me, the whole design of Llama Life is a very delicate balance between creating pressure, fun, reminding you that you've gone off a task. That's also a problem I have, is sometimes I go down a rabbit hole. So during the countdown timer, every now and again, there'll be a little sound, like a chime sound to say, hey, you're still on track, and kind of try to bring people back.
That's great. I'm even thinking about how this actually might be helpful for in our coaching groups, because we have people do time prediction. And then really helping them track their tasks. And one of the most common challenges that we have with doing this time tracking is so let's say we actually remember to start the timer and actually remember to stop the timer, so you actually know how long the thing took you. And so having a little sort of check-in notification, say, hey, are you still on this task? I think is great. And I love that you also, it looks like the one of the time displays is like a pie chart similar to the time timer, which is great. I love that visualization of time.
Yeah, definitely. Same. I'm a very visual kind of person, and just seeing that pie timer again is about, so you want pressure, but you don't want stress. And we had some feedback. Some people said, well, actually seeing a digital timer countdown is too stressful because I can see it ticking down every second. So having that pie visual, like you said, kind of similar to the time timer, where you can still see time moving, but it's not as obvious as a ticking clock. So that was also feedback. Somebody asked for that. So I put it in. But just going back to the software development side of it, because that's how I built Llama Life, right? I was actually just teaching myself to code. That was my career change. It was going from advertising to teaching myself how to code. And that was life-changing for me too. Not just because I am building Llama Life now, but because I actually found something that I really love doing. I can get hyper-focused with the code, like programming. It's huge. And I don't know, I can't stress how life-changing it is for me, because doing something that you love makes so much difference. We're at work half our lives, right? And most of the day. So if you're kind of struggling day in, day out to do your main job, it just causes a lot of mental anxiety. And for me, there's other anxiety, other pressures. Nobody's sort of perfect, but when I'm actually coding, like sort of programming Llama Life, like I actually, I don't know, I get very calm. I feel very calm about it. It's enjoyable because I'm solving problems all the time. I'm getting to be creative because I do the design part of Llama Life too. And I'm also working in an area that I'm very passionate about and is very meaningful to me.
And those are all things that are going to help our brain function better. And
exactly.
I often say that it is, people with ADHD, we don't have the luxury to work a job we don't love.
Yeah.
Because if we do, it's going to probably not turn out well. Right.
Yeah,
It can be frustrating. It can be, and I think this is a common thing that I hear is that like the harder you try to do certain things, the worse you end up doing. And to me, that is a perfect example of what it's like to be a mismatch in your environment.
Yeah, that's it. I think it takes a lot of self-awareness. Like you almost have to try and step back and go, what is happening in my day-to-day, and try and break out of that cycle. Because, I was coming back from work every day completely exhausted. And it wasn't because the work was hard. It was because I was really pushing everything uphill and trying to do even these small tasks like the timesheets was such a struggle and such a block for me that I had to expend a lot of mental energy just doing those little tasks. Look, there are other challenges with having your own business, but it's a different kind of challenge. And for me, it's a good challenge. It feels
we can often create the challenge and we also create the solution. So we have that freedom to do that. I do want to ask you about, and then we're going to take a quick break, and reflecting on sort of making that leap from your corporate job to starting your own business. And you were kind of talking about how, there's a lot of people who recommend sort of making this gradual transition. Were there any lessons learned for you that if you can kind of go back in time, was there anything you would have done differently about that approach?
About doing the sudden break? For me, I would say no, because I needed that. So if I look back on my life's journey, I always find that I need something big. I need to kind of throw myself into situations for it to work. So for example, I grew up in Melbourne, Australia, and that's where I'm living now. But, I've lived in New York City and I've also lived in London. Those two things came about. So I lived overseas outside of Australia for about 12 years. And that came about because I was really struggling in Melbourne. I just felt very lost. I was looking for my first job and I was like, I can't really find anything that I'm interested in. And everything seems a little boring. And I just couldn't find anything that sparked my interest. So one day I thought, well, maybe I'll just go to London. And I didn't know anyone in London and I didn't have a job lined up, but I did line up 4 interviews and I jumped on a plane and I said, I'm going to give myself I think it was 3 months. And I said, if I don't find a job in 3 months, then I'll return to Australia. So I kind of just threw myself into this situation where I didn't know anyone. I didn't have a job, didn't even have a place to stay. And I jumped on a plane. And you know what? That's exactly what I needed. So I ended up getting my first job in 13 days. So in 13 days, I went to these 4 interviews. In that time, I also had to do a presentation for the senior management team to say why they should give me this job. It was an entry level sort of junior kind of job, but they said, you need to do this presentation. I was like, I don't even have a laptop with me. I had to go find one. I had to go find a place to stay. And all of these things happened in 13 days because there was some pressure. It was like a live or die kind of pressure.
As I'm listening to you describe this, it sounds very... it's very relatable. I know that when I started my own practice, it was because I was laid off the same week that we signed our mortgage, right? So we just bought a home, literally the same week I was laid off. And so I took this, all right, well, I wanted to start a practice at some point. I guess now is the time. And so it's like having that pressure, sort of like the back against the wall, like with this mindset of like, I got to do this, is for me super helpful. There's certainly a stress that comes along with it, but I like that the phrasing that you were using about having the pressure without the stress. And it's really kind of about finding what that balance is for each of us. Let's take a really quick break. And when we come back, we will pick this right back up and keep going. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from ARC. ARC is ADHD Rewired Coaching. Find out more and check out our session schedules for our winter season of coaching and accountability groups starting in January 2023 at coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com to start your pre-registration process so you can join us for our next winter registration event this Thursday, November 3rd at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern. And if you are listening to this in the future and that date has passed, that's coachingrewired.com to find out the most up-to-date information on the current and upcoming seasons. What if you could work alongside other adults with ADHD who truly understand the challenges we face? What would it be worth to be in a space that's shame-free and judgment-free, where you can develop the skills and strategies you need to reduce your overwhelm and take control of your life? And what would be the long-term impact to have continued support beyond our award-winning 10-week program?
I decided to join the group because I'd listened to the podcast for 4 years and I knew I'd wanted to do ARC since I first heard Eric talking about it at the very beginning of the podcast.
Before this group, I thought I had to do this alone or with the support of other neurotypical people around me.
What I learned is that with the right support, change is possible. And I'm not sure I really believed that for most of my life.
Before, I would ask myself, what do I even offer to the world?
I've never heard of anyone else struggling the way I feel I do.
I really feel this way, that this changed my life.
I thought in order to grow and make progress, I'd always have to mask and explain to people what I was struggling with or what I needed help with.
I am most proud of being able to be vulnerable, especially in my masterminds. It's hard for me because I'm not used to people being supportive of me when I'm in a state of not having achieved something. So that's something that's actually really difficult for me.
What I did not expect was coming away with a group of people that I love and respect so much.
This community is amazing, and I feel like I've found purpose.
My biggest takeaway is that it's okay to be me. It's okay to need support in ways that others don't. And it's okay to celebrate things that I'm proud of, no matter what anyone else thinks.
What I've accomplished in 10 weeks, I didn't do it alone. I did it with all of you. I did it with my A-team.
It just completely changed my outlook. I'm learning to reframe things. I see value in myself. I see where I can succeed. I see where I can have a lot of growth.
To be around these people that think like I do, it's just such a relief to know that you're not alone, that you might not think like everybody around you, but you certainly think like a bunch of people that are in the world.
If you're thinking about joining this group, if you think you need this, it's probably time to do it.
If this sounds like the support and the community you need, then join us for our 31st season of coaching and accountability groups by going to coachingrewired.com and add your name to our winter interest list. And join us this week on November 3rd for our next winter registration event. That's this week, Thursday, November 3rd at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern. Registration is by invitation only, so once you add your name to our winter interest list at coachingrewired.com, you'll receive instructions on what you'll need to complete your pre-registration process. Get ready to have a great new year by starting out at coachingrewired.com. Come grow with us. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back with Marie Ung. Marie, so when we left off, we were talking about sort of this transition that you made and have using sort of pressure to actually get the stuff done that we are wanting to get done. Now, Llama Life is your 5th startup?
So I've been doing startups for a while, and yeah, it's the 5th one. The thing with startups is it's very, most of them fail, right? Because you're trying something new and you don't know if it's going to work. And so you've got two things. You've got an idea that's new, but you yourself are also new to this environment, this job that you've created for yourself. So yeah, a lot of startups fail, and there's many reasons for that. What I just mentioned, but also just money is one thing. And I think motivation is also the other. I certainly experienced both of those things. I didn't mention it before, but this is many years ago now, but my first startup didn't work. That failed. And I actually had to go back to corporate for a couple of years to replenish my savings because it's not cheap trying to run or start your own business. that was very, very difficult, but it was just something that had to be done. And I put a time frame on it. I was like, I'll do this for 2 years again, and then I'm going to do my own business again. So I think for me, that helped because I knew it was only for a short time. And I also knew that I've done it once, I can do it again. And
let me ask you, you seem like a really both resilient and motivated person. What has helped you keep going when, shit's just not working out, right? Like you described that the previous startups didn't work. So you learned things from that because you dusted off and kept going. But I know that failure as an event, as something that we try that doesn't work, even if we have the mindset of, okay, we're going to learn from this, it still hurts going through it.
It does.
How did you kind of keep yourself going and not sort of lose that energy to say, all right, what else am I going to try?
I think it helps if you failed multiple times because, just like anything else, like the first time something happens to you, it always hits the hardest. But because I've failed multiple times, it definitely gets easier over time. And
so true.
I also look back on my life and I can say, well, going to New York or going to London, I did that. That was really hard and I did that. So I can do it again. So I think it's just the multiple failures that really helps. But obviously the first one really stings. It is a dent on your self-confidence when that happens. But there was also something someone else said to me in the corporate world that I'll never forget. And that was, so I saw him walking around the office one day and he always seems very happy and very, just content and joyous. And I was like, oh, you seem happy today. And he said something like, well, what is the other choice? What is the alternative? That stuck with me a long time. And I kind of apply that to a lot of things because if you fail in a business or fail anywhere else in your life, you really do have this choice of, okay, well, what am I going to do about that? Right? You could wallow in the sorrow and the failure, or you can go, well, actually, I learned something from that. Let me try again. Let me try and flip that around. Now, that is easier said than done. Obviously, it's much harder to do that than for me to just say that. But I really like what he said about, well, what's the alternative? What is the other choice? And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of, he doesn't even know that till today. I'm thinking about this thing that he said. It was like a passing comment for him, just walking around the office. Oh, yeah, well, what's the alternative? But I always think about that because
why do you think that resonated with you so much?
Well, I've definitely had my ups and downs as well, right? Everybody. It's hard because on the surface, people might look at Llama Life and go, well, that's so great. You made this transition, you changed careers, you're doing something you really love. But, behind the scenes, there's definitely ups and downs. And sometimes you wake up, you're having a bad day, or, sometimes you have a month where the revenue isn't as high as you want it to be. But yeah, so I say that because I think a lot of people see things just on the surface. And I don't think things like social media help us either, because that's obviously painting more of a successful picture, right? People just share what they think are the highlights of their life, and that doesn't help.
And even that, one of the things I tell people sometimes is that even someone like myself, who is very vulnerable and will share lots of personal stories, here on the podcast and in other spaces, I'm sharing the best version of my worst self. And so, not everyone will admit that that's what they're doing. But so when people are sharing their struggles on social media, that's a doctored up version of their struggles. I promise you, people are struggling more than what you would think they would be.
Yeah. And I think with social media, it's not all bad. So there's a really great ADHD community just on Twitter. And I spend a lot of time on Twitter, actually. So I kind of document my journey with Llama Life on Twitter. And I share the good things about building my business. And I also share, when we're having some challenges and struggles as well. But as part of that, I got exposed to, let's just call it ADHD Twitter, just people on Twitter with ADHD. Oh my gosh, it's so great to, read some of these tweets and challenges people are having, because a lot of people, some people are quite lighthearted about it. They'll say something which is completely devastating, but it's funny because it's relatable. And that does a few things, right? It makes me laugh, but it also helps me to know there are so many people out there who have exactly the same challenges as me. And it just normalizes it a bit for me. I'm talking about it very freely now, but I would say 2 years ago, I was very nervous about talking about ADHD, especially when I was at the corporate job, because I didn't want to be disadvantaged in any way. And look, I don't know if I would have been because I left, but I was just worried I might be looked at differently or not being given the same opportunities to progress or get promoted. Yeah, so I think there's still, a small stigma around that, but it's definitely getting better. And I think part of it is about me just accepting it. So it doesn't, when I got my diagnosis, it was kind of this weird moment where everything made sense. So I was very excited about the fact that, I know exactly what is happening now. But then there was also another part of that, which was, oh my gosh, okay, so now what do I do? Because I've got this thing. So it was this moment of excitement, but also a bit of anxiety about, how's it going to affect me? What's that going to do for my career opportunities or whatever? And but then I realized that the diagnosis doesn't actually change me, right? I am still me. Everything else is still me. This is just who I am. And this is what I have. Nothing changes there. The only thing that changes is that I've identified it. And because I've identified it, now I can go look for solutions. It's much easier to meet other people and talk about it and look for something. It had a quote unquote sort of label. So I don't normally like labels, but just having a label for this now, I was like, okay, well now I can go find what this is because I know what I'm searching for.
The only place that I don't like labels is on my shirts. I find them too itchy. But I actually think the labels, it helps us have an understanding of kind of what we're working with. It doesn't explain everything, but it's a really, I think, helpful starting point.
Yes.
So I know that there's lots of people who are very it's pathologizing. It's you know what? We're struggling. Let's name it what it is. Because when you can name it, you can tame it. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Someone else said this on Twitter, but rejection sensitive, is it dysphoria?
Yep.
RSD.
Yeah.
Right. So that was really helpful for me to have a label for that because
which
it's
is
something that's really hard to
not
describe.
Actually official DSM associated criteria with ADHD. I mean, this is actually it's not even technically a official diagnosis in any diagnostic tool. But the thing that I find interesting about this is how many people have responded in the ADHD community to this. And I think that says something. I'm not saying that, RSD is poo-poo, because it's I think when something resonates so significantly and pervasively that it is worth the researchers who actually do this stuff, to research this stuff so we can be talking about this from a more scientifically found, solid place. Because, that's, I've been having some concerns about for example, on TikTok, TikTok is, it's you would think TikTok was invented for ADHD, right? And I know a lot of people are saying that they've learned they had ADHD because of TikTok, which is this really interesting, kind of strange phenomena. But there's a lot of misinformation about ADHD on TikTok. Lots of people saying, this is because of ADHD. It's that actually has nothing to do with ADHD, right? So that is interesting. So what I want to actually do is we do need to take one more quick break. When we come back, I want to kind of get from your perspective just some of the lessons that you've learned that from the last many years of your experiences and how you are now designing a life around your ADHD based on what you've learned. So we will be right back. ADHD Rewired is not alone. Check out all of the podcasts on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network, including Hacking Your ADHD with Will Kerr, ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens, and ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan. Go to ADHDrewired.com/podcast network to subscribe to this show and all of our shows. Then, next week, I'll be joined by all of our podcasters and our ADHD Rewired coaches for our monthly live Q&A. We do that every second Tuesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 Eastern. Jump in and join us on Zoom by going to ADHDrewired.com/events to register. And don't forget to hit subscribe to this show in your favorite podcast player. You can find value in the show and discover new ways to manage your ADHD every week. You can find the resources we mention in every show when you go to ADHDrewired.com/podcast. So if you think there's an episode or a resource that might be helpful to somebody else, then share this episode or any episode with your friends, family, therapists, or anyone you think would benefit from hearing our interviews that come out every week. Next week, you'll be able to listen to last month's live Q&A, where you can find tips on managing restless legs, where to start on home renovations, motivation, and self-care, and more. That's ADHDrewired.com/podcast to find their show notes and resources mentioned in every episode each week. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the show and all of our shows. We wouldn't be here without you. Discover more from ADHD Rewired by going to ADHDrewired.com. That's ADHDrewired.com. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our patrons at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Perks like ad-free episodes start at just $5 a month, and support can start at any amount that makes sense to you. I want to welcome and thank Summer P for joining us on Patreon this week. Welcome to our Patreon community, and thank you for your support. Are you looking for a little taste of coaching? For only $25 a month, you can join me and our patron-only monthly coaching call every fourth Tuesday of the month at 3 p.m. Central, and still get ad-free episodes too. If $10 a month is more in your budget, you'll get to hear the recordings from our monthly coaching calls and get ad-free episodes in our private RSS feed. You just have to set up a one-time, you get a link, and then you add it to your favorite podcast player, and then it's a private podcast feed just for you in your favorite podcast player. And just a reminder to all of our patrons at $5 or more, to get that private RSS feed set up, once you've signed up, click on the membership tab at the top of the Patreon website, and you'll find directions on how to connect your private feed to your favorite podcast app, unless that favorite app is Spotify. We appreciate all of our supporters on Patreon, no matter the amount. So if it's in the budget for you right now and you find value in this show, consider becoming a patron by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks. All right, we are back with Marie Ung. All right, so Marie, share with us some of the big lessons that you think that you've learned over the last number of years that you can apply to how to design a life that is more ADHD friendly.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's really finding what you love doing. And for me, going from that corporate job into doing many different startups, I've seen it time and time again with myself. So, before doing Llama Life, I had another startup. So it was in the startup space, but it was a different idea. That didn't resonate with me. So it was essentially doing freshly cooked food for dogs delivered to your door. And that is a business. I've seen other people do that business as well. But for me, it didn't really tick the box. So it ticked the startup box, like being able to do your own business and design that business to how you wanted it. But I don't really like cooking. And there's a lot of hands-on cooking to get that off the ground.
Whoops.
And, I did have customers, right? Like I had a business, but it was just not the right business for me. And I'm like, I don't even cook for myself. Why am I trying to do this business that is to do with food and ordering food? And so for me, I was like, okay, well, that's not the right fit. So I've just seen this time and time again with the stuff that I do, that you've got to find something that you love doing. So I am very conscious of it now. If I'm not having fun or enjoying what I'm doing, I try and pause and go, okay, well, reflect. Like, what is it that you are not enjoying? And that is really hard to do because we're all going at 1,000,000 miles an hour and we're all very busy in our day-to-day lives. But it really helps to kind of carve out a little bit of time to reflect on what is happening. And you can do that however you want. Maybe go for a walk, or I try and journal. So there's many different forms of journaling. My journaling is just little bullet points. And even then, sometimes it's hard to kind of keep that, daily. But I just try and write down a few bullet points every day. So when I start my day, there's 2 questions I answer. I answer, what am I grateful for? And I just put down a couple of bullets. It takes me like 1 minute. What am I grateful for? And what can I do today to make it great? Because I want to take responsibility for my own day. What can I do to make today great? So the grateful things is important because it puts you in the right frame of mind. And then you say, what can I do to make today great? And then at the end of the day, I answer another 2 questions. So I write down, what do I think went well today? A few bullet points. And what did I learn? That's it. I try and do that every day. And it's a time for me to kind of check in and go, well, is this working? Like, am I happy, with what I'm doing, with the life that I'm designing for myself? Am I happy with this? And if I'm not, then I really need to try and change something.
Has the process of doing that ever gave you any moments of like real pause where like, oh crap, like, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it has, because when you look back over time, so for me, I was looking back through these entries that's just on an app on my phone, and I was looking back, and it's like, what did I learn today, or what could I have done better? When I looked back through that, I started to see the same thing coming up time and time again. And if it's coming up over and over again, you're like, well, you haven't learned. Like you know that there's something wrong, but you haven't changed anything because it keeps coming up again and again and again. And when you look back over time and you see it written down like 20 times, you're like, well, I think there's something wrong here. Like you know there's something wrong, but you haven't changed it. And it's really in your face. And I think for me, it helps because I'm super time blind. So I feel like a lot of the time I'm just living in that moment. But having that journal and being able to look back and go, okay, well, for the last month, you've kind of had this thing and you've written it down every day and you can see it 30 days in a row. How come you haven't changed it? And then it becomes in your face. It helps put some concept around time because you can actually see every day that this has happened. For me, that's important that it's a constant reminder, because otherwise that would get lost, just very easily lost. Suddenly it'll be 6 months down the track and nothing would have changed. So writing it down for me is super helpful, and trying to constantly change stuff if it's not working. I also track my mood every day. This is again through just an app. It's a 5-point scale. So you got like 5 emojis or faces or something. I just record it at the end of each day. So one learning there is record your mood, but also keep it simple, because I've tried to record my mood many times and it has stuck this time only because I kept it simple. So I used to try and record it several times throughout the day. And there's 2 problems with that. One, so I'd end up at the end of the day, I'd end up with maybe, 5 or 6 entries. The 2 problems are, the first thing is it's inconsistent because I'm only recording my mood when it's extreme. Like, oh, I'm feeling stressed right now, or I'm feeling very happy right now. So that's not consistent, because like one day I might have 5 entries, the next day I might have 10, and they can average each other out. So maybe you had a moment in the morning where you were very happy, and then a moment in the evening where you were sad. So then your mood for that day is just flat. Yeah. And that doesn't tell me anything. So now what I do, so the 2 problems are that it can even out, it can just average out. And then the second problem is that you're only recording the extreme moments anyway. So what I do now is I just do 1 entry at the end of every day, and it helps you reflect as well. You look back on your day and you go, what was it like today on this 5-point scale? And it makes you think, okay, what was the day like? How did I feel? Again, the self-awareness reflection thing is huge for me.
It's huge.
And I put that's
entry. That's something that we know that people with ADHD often struggle with, is just that self-awareness and that kind of checking in with self. And I think one of the things I'm hearing you say, which I think is such an important point to highlight, is the importance of sort of tracking, whether it's through journaling or, a rating scale that you do each day, but keeping it stupidly simple, right? Like, it is amazing, like how often I see people like overcomplicate these things. Like, so if you're tracking a goal, make it yes, no. Like, did you do it or not? Make it easy.
Yeah. So now I can look back on my mood for a month or a week or even a year, and I can see sort of the ups and downs, and I can go, okay, well, last month was really bad. Well, what happened? Like, it's all about visualizing the time and also how I'm feeling throughout time. That really helps me. Whatever system you design for yourself, like you said, Eric, just keeping it simple is so key. But there needs to be something where you can look back and go, here's what happened at a particular time, and here's how I felt. And if you're not feeling great, then something needs to change. But I'm definitely not perfect at this. So it sounds great when I'm talking about it, but it's not. There are days where it's a bit harder than others. And I've certainly gone through things like, all the time where I'm going to create some new habits for myself. I'll spend hours kind of designing, okay, what are these new habits going to be? I'll set up an app and I'll be like, yep, tomorrow I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to get up early. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do some Pilates. I'm going to do some meditation. And then, I spent hours setting this up and then the next day comes and I don't do any of it. So I am definitely, I do stuff like that all the time. And when I look back, I go, well, that's just because you didn't keep it simple. Maybe you should have just chosen one habit to do, but you chose 10. And because you chose 10, you didn't even start day one. So yeah, keeping it simple, so important.
Less is more. Like I think in so many areas of how we manage our ADHD, less is more.
But it's so contradictory, right? Because as someone with ADHD, I get excited and I want to do all these things and I'm really excited about the improvements I can make. Therefore, I choose to improve a lot of things and I choose to give myself a lot of challenges. But if I only gave myself less, then I think things will be a lot easier. I also had this conversation with someone about software development because with Llama Life, we were trying to roll out like all these new features. We would say, okay, well, we're going to give ourselves a week to do this, but it was too short a timeline. Like it was unrealistic. We would always take, say, a week and a half, just as an example, say we took a week and a half, but it's all about expectation setting, right? Because if I had said, we're going to take 2 weeks to do this, and then we did it in a week and a half, we would all be feeling, oh my gosh, we beat the schedule. We delivered early. But because I said we only have a week, and we took a week and a half, it's like we failed. we actually did not deliver on time, but in reality, took a week and a half. That doesn't change. What changed was I set the wrong expectation or it was an unrealistic goal. But in reality, it was still a week and a half. And whether you say the deadline was a week or 2 weeks, that makes a massive difference on how everyone's feeling about it. For me, that's something I'm trying very hard to do now is manage my own expectations. I always don't give myself enough time. I always think I can do it quickly, but I just am always setting myself up for failure because of that, right? So I'm trying to be a little bit more forgiving to myself.
You're setting yourself up for learning?
For learning, I think learning is like the longer term thing, but in the moment it feels like failure. And you obviously want to try and minimize that as well. So how you're feeling, you want to manage for me, it's a lot about managing how I'm feeling and my emotional state, and just missing a goal by a couple of days because I didn't give myself enough time is not a good way for me to do that. I should just give myself an extra day because in reality, it doesn't change. It's still a week and a half, but I feel so much better if I beat the goal or the timeline versus I miss it.
I don't know if you feel the same way about putting, dates on goals. For me, like I look at it as a date on a goal. It's somewhere to aim our attention. It's not about hitting the date per se. Like it doesn't matter that much if I hit the date. Like I'm aiming for it, but that's the idea. It's giving me that thing to aim for, right? That if we have an actual aim, then we're going to go in the right direction. First, if we don't have an aim, if we're like, it's like, well, no one's really waiting for it. We're going to release it when we want to release it. Which is like the worst kind of time frame. It's like whenever you get to it, it's like the kiss of death for someone with ADHD.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Yeah, definitely.
So it's, so if you're doing these little sprints or these kind of short-term goals, just let it be a tool to let you focus and give you direction. And if you miss it by a couple of days, so be it.
Yeah.
Which is lovely about working for ourselves because we can, no one's going to really get mad at us if we're off a day or two, or a week or two, or like we've been doing a whole curriculum revamp. It's taken us actually a whole season longer than I thought it was going to. So we can get this done in a 10-week. We're now into like the 20 plus week and we're doing good, but it took a lot longer. And, working together with a team has all these other challenges associated with it because now you're not just managing, at least for me, because I'm working with everyone except for my assistant who has ADHD, right? Because we're dealing with all people with ADHD working on these projects and we're all kind of time blind, right? Our ability to predict, like, even though like by wisdom, I know that things take me 3 times longer than I think they're going to. But in that moment, it's really hard to say, oh, but no, we could totally do this thing in this time period. It's like this optimism but I think it also helps us keep going and helps us kind of push ourselves. It's that the pressure versus the stress. as you were saying
Yes.
earlier.
Yeah. I like that. I like how you phrased it in terms of an aim and having something to kind of shoot for, but also being forgiving to yourself or less hard on yourself if you miss it. I guess there's different situations. If you're in a work situation, a deadline is probably a deadline. You know, if you're working for someone else,
Right.
you wouldn't want to get into a situation where you just miss that. But if it's something else, like you're just kind of setting yourself some kind of goal to work toward, then it can make sense. Or if you have your own business, then there's obviously more flexibility. But
do you struggle at all with perfectionism?
I do sometimes, you know, and I think startups have really helped me to improve on that because we're a small team. We're 2 people right now. There's only so many hours in the day. So if you do try and perfect something, I mean, you just don't have time for it because you've got to prioritize and you could actually build maybe a new feature versus perfecting an old one. So yeah, just having that constraint on time has helped with the perfectionism.
And for me too, it also helps with scope creep.
Oh yeah.
Because we tend to have 1,000 ideas by looking at stuff, right? Or like, oh, we could do that. Oh, we could do that. Okay. What's our aim right now? And what's our target date? Because for me, like if we have all the time in the world, all of those ideas seem like, let's do it. Why not? But if we're like, nope, like here's what our objective is. All those ideas then go in the parking lot to revisit for a next iteration versus, because otherwise stuff will never, ever, ever get done.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you think is if you were to identify what's the best thing that you have done in designing your ADHD life that you would not trade for anything?
I think the best thing that I've done is kind of take a chance on myself, kind of follow my gut because I think I can do it. You know, it's like I'd like to say I knew I could do it. But it's like, I had a really strong feeling that I can do this, but I just have to make that leap. And that's why if I draw a life in terms of, you know, my trajectory, it's not like a nice even line. It's kind of very zigzaggy, right? It goes up, there's like massive peaks and then it flattens for a bit and there's a massive peak. These are moments where I've just kind of thrown myself into the deep end, but I know that I need that to go forward. That's just kind of how my life is. And if I look at my brother's life, it's very different. He does not have ADHD. His life is a little bit more even. It's very smooth. Like maybe he might not agree, but I look at it from the outside and I think, well, you know, you kind of followed a certain path, but my path doesn't go forward unless I create these moments for myself where I throw myself in. So for me, I think it's just about knowing myself, taking a chance on myself, and just knowing what works for you and trying to design that, like trying to create a life around that, because otherwise you're just fitting in with somebody else's life or structure or somebody else's dream, somebody else's company. And that's when, at least for me, that was very, very difficult. I just knew like I couldn't continue that way. So it was almost not a choice either. I was like, well, what's the alternative? I just stay with that, or I choose to do my own thing, and whatever I need to do, I'll make that work. I can't tell you how much happier I am having done that, but it was not easy, but it is so much better now that I can control some of these things. I can control my environment a bit more. Yeah, it's a huge, huge relief. And it's not to say there aren't challenges, because like you said, running your own business is not easy, but I find these challenges to be good challenges. That's what keeps me going. It's like, it's always working towards something and you're working towards your own thing. And yeah, the challenges are real, but they're great. They're great. And they're solvable because you are in control of that.
You know, it's that idea that everything is figure-outable. And that's part of why I love being an entrepreneur, because it's like, you see this problem, you might not know how to solve it, but it's figure-outable. So it becomes the puzzle that you're working on. And that's engaging and it's exciting and it's fun. So will you let people know where they can reach you and where they can find you, learn more about Llama Life?
Yeah, sure. So I'm very active on Twitter. I share everything I'm doing there. So on Twitter, you can find me at 3 Hour Coffee. So that's just spelled out 3 Hour Coffee. And Llama Life is at llamalife.co. That's llamalife.co.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was really fun. Definitely check out the Llama Life app and check out Marie on Twitter. And thank you so much for spending this time with us. This is great.
Thank you for having me.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.